The Detroit Lions finished the 2025 season with a 9-8 record and missed the playoffs for the first time since 2022. It was a very disappointing season for a team that had Super Bowl aspirations, and especially for a team that was coming off of a 15-win season. It was a disappointing year in more ways than one, as what has to be remembered with the Lions is this was a team that went a combined 27-7 over the 2023 and 2024 regular seasons. They went to the NFC Championship game in 2023 and had a top 15 scoring offense all time in 2024, and it seemed that Dan Campbell would lead this team from the outhouse to the penthouse, but they didn't, and in 2024 they lost in the divisional round of the playoffs to the Washington Commanders in an absolute stunner, and heading into 2025 there was a lot of optimism because this team was still largely intact, and with how many guys got injured in 2024, there was reason to believe they could get better. Maybe not from a record standpoint, as back-to-back 15-win seasons is nearly impossible, but it wasn't unreasonable to think this team could win the Super Bowl, yet they ended up missing the playoffs. And with the 2025 season in the rearview mirror, the Lions are now in a tough situation, and in today's video, we're going to break down how we got here, what's next for the Lions, and what they can do moving forward. And before we start, if you could like the video, a football will appear when you do and would also be very much appreciated. And with that preface out of the way, let's begin! And we are starting today's video by breaking down why the Lions are in a tough situation and why the pressure is on more so now than ever before. And believe it or not, it starts with how successful they've been over the past 5 years, specifically within the NFL draft. Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell took over in January of 2021, and their first move was a very controversial move, at least at the time, and it was to trade longtime franchise quarterback Matt Stafford to the Rams in exchange for Jared Goff, a 2021 third-round pick, and 2 first-round picks. This enabled the Lions to be able to build their team the right way and the way that Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes envisioned, which is through the NFL draft. And with their first pick, they selected a player who I think will be a Hall of Famer if he stays healthy, in Oregon offensive tackle Penei Sewell. Penei is an absolute monster and is currently a 3-time first-team All-Pro, and this isn't talked about a lot, though I'm sure Lions fans are well aware of this, but Penei was only 20 years old when he was drafted and played the first few games of his career at 20 years old. His birthday is in October, and he'll only turn 26 years old in October later this year. And this was a generational prospect at the tackle position, meaning an actual generational prospect, not a player that gets propelled by the media, but an actual generational prospect, and this is what it looks like. Drafting a Hall of Fame cornerstone tackle, again if he stays healthy, is a tremendous way to start your rebuild. They also selected defensive tackle Alim McNeill in the same draft, and Alim McNeill is a really good defensive tackle, and what is unfortunate for him personally is he plays on such a good team with so many stars that at times his impact on the game is minimized from a coverage standpoint nationally, but Lions fans would be the first to tell you how good of a player Alim McNeill is when healthy. He didn't have the best year in 2025, at least relative to the Alim McNeill Lions fans are used to, but I am willing to dismiss his 2025 season as he unfortunately tore his ACL in week 15 of 2024. So that part should be noted, but coming out of a draft with Penei Sewell, Alim McNeill, and a receiver in the 4th round by the name of Amon-Ra St. Brown, well, you can start to see as to why the Lions have had the success they've had over the past several years. And another player that's good in his own right is linebacker Derek Barnes. So in the first class of a rebuild, the Lions walked out with 4 legit contributors in Sewell, McNeill, Amon-Ra St. Brown, and Derek Barnes. And even over the course of Fatu Melifonwo's rookie contract, he was a fine player. But between Sewell and St. Brown, they have 8 Pro Bowls and 5 first-team All-Pros in the first 5 years of their careers. And after a 3-13-1 first year with Dan Campbell as the team's head coach, they had the 2nd pick in the 2022 draft and used it on the Michigan man Aiden Hutchinson. Hutch is a really good player, and it's self-explanatory how much he means to the Lions and to the state of Michigan, and he is a DPOY candidate year in and year out. I am a firm believer that he would have won the Defensive Player of the Year award in 2024 had he not gone down with a season-ending injury, as at the time he went down, he had 45 pressures in 5 games on just 198 pass rushing snaps, which is insane. For reference, Myles Garrett just broke the sack record and had 84 pressures on 507 pass rushing snaps in 2020 2025, and if Hutch kept his pace in 24, he would have had 115 pressures on the same amount of pass rushing snaps. It was an unreal start to the season for him, and all of this is to say that in the first two drafts of the Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell era, they secured a franchise tackle of the future, a franchise wide receiver 1 of the future, and a franchise pass rusher 2. And before we continue, I want to take a second to talk to you guys about today's sponsor, Turf Sports. Turf Sports is a live NFL prediction app that asks real-time questions during NFL games, such as what's going to happen next drive, and if you get it right, you earn points. What's cool about Turf Sports is it's free to play and you can compete for a cash jackpot prize against friends, other squads, or the global ranking leaderboard. The more predictions you make correctly means the higher you rank on the leaderboard for a chance at a huge jackpot cash prize, and again, it's free to play and makes watching football a lot more interesting. And you can download Turf now by using the link in the description below, join my squad, and climb the leaderboard to win a cash prize. And a big thank you to Turf for sponsoring today's video. But the 2022 draft class did not stop with Aiden Hutchinson, and even having a player of Aiden Hutchinson's caliber, if you took home that type of player with the draft and that was your best player by far and everybody else was special teams players at best, I think there's a decent amount of GMs that would take that knowing that they have a franchise pass rusher and they don't have to worry about that for the next several years. So even that is a win in itself, and especially the caliber of player Hutchinson is, but they also drafted Jameson Williams through a trade-up with the Vikings, and safety Kirby Joseph later on day 2. We have talked about Jameson Williams several times on the channel before, and the impact that he has on games regularly, and I don't think JMO will ever be a 15 or 1600 yard receiver, or a guy that will ever lead the NFL in receiving in any category, but he's a player that you have to account for every single time he's on the field, and in some ways that is, maybe not just as impactful, but it is extremely impactful regardless, because of how much he can change the game at the snap of a finger. And by the way, I do think JMO at times can be viewed as more of a gadget player / one usage type player, but he's quietly working on back-to-back 1,000 yard seasons. Kirby Joseph was a late day 2 pick for the Lions in the 2022 draft, and when he's been on the field, he's been a really good player for the Lions and was a first-team All-Pro in 2024, the year they won 15 games, as he had 9 interceptions and, believe it or not, also finished 6th in Defensive Player of the Year voting. I think there is something to be said about Kirby Joseph having all of the interceptions he's had over the course of his career, because there are seasons where safeties only have 1 interception or 2 interceptions, and then pretty quickly you're looking at a 2-year span where a safety has 2 interceptions in 27 or 28 games, but Kirby has had 3 interceptions or more in every year that he's played. There is something to be said about a player who is always around the football, who is smart enough and has the instincts to put himself in advantageous situations so that the Lions can get the ball back and that they can make big plays defensively. The one part that is not discussed right now nationally, though Lions fans and people in the state of Michigan and the Lions media are well aware of, is there is concern that Kirby Joseph has a degenerative knee problem, which limited him to 6 games in 2025. That is obviously not good if that is going to be true, and I don't want to act like I'm Rick Harrison from Pawn Stars and that I have a guy in Michigan that's going to go in and take a look at Kirby's knee and that I'm going to have more knowledge on this situation than what is currently being discussed publicly, but that is a concern right now within the Lions fan base, that his best football is behind him and that with this degenerative knee condition, that where his knee is now is the best that it will be for the rest of his playing days, meaning because it is a degenerative knee condition, if this is true by the way, that it would only get worse from here, meaning it would not get better. But for the sake of the 2022 draft, that was a tremendous hit, and to be able to walk out with Aiden Hutchinson, Jameson Williams, and Kirby Joseph is a tremendous draft class by GM Brad Holmes and of course head coach Dan Campbell. I'm not going to spend too much time on the 2023 Lions class, mainly because we have to discuss the 24 and 25 Lions class, but they had 4 selections in the top 45. They were used on Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, and Brian Branch. I'm a big proponent of giving guys their flowers in their prime, mainly because guys' primes are a very short portion in their life, so I like to give them their flowers, while they can still smell the roses, if you will. Jahmyr Gibbs is one of the most talented running backs I've ever seen, strictly based on eye test. The numbers also also back that up. He had more touchdowns than Barry Sanders before turning the age of 24. He is an unbelievable talent. Jack Campbell was a first-team All-Pro in 2025. That was a hit before he was a first-team All-Pro. It's only even more of a home run now. Sam Laporta is one of the best tight ends when healthy, and Brian Branch is a really good defensive back that I don't know how he fell to the 45th pick, but hey, credit Brad Holmes for going up and getting him, because that was a player that should have never fell as far as he did, and there's a lot of teams regretting not drafting Brian Branch now, whenever he was, by pretty much every definition, draft a good football player. Now, to go back to the big concept of why the Lions are in a tough situation really starts with the 2024 draft class, and it's always a great problem to have whenever you draft the way they did from 21 to 23, but you have to have that type of repeated success, and that's almost impossible. And in 2024, they drafted Terrion Arnold and Ennis Rakestraw with their first 2 picks. I like the process, drafting 2 corners in a division with Justin Jefferson, and in a division where the Bears had just selected Caleb Williams with the first overall pick and Rome Odunze with the 9th overall pick, and also in a division where the Packers were coming off of a big playoff win against the Cowboys, and there was a chance they went to the NFC Championship game in 2023, but the 49ers beat them in Santa Clara. So I didn't mind the first 2 picks being corners in the 2024 draft at all, and in fact, I really like those picks for the Lions, and I really thought Ennis Rakestraw was going to be a player that Lions fans would love, because I thought he was going to be an in-your-face corner and a very physical guy that Dan Campbell would love, and that Lions fans would also love over the next few years. But here we are 2 years in, and Ennis Rakestraw has played 8 games and unfortunately missed the entire 2025 season as he had shoulder surgery before the season started. Those were the only 2 selections in the top 100. I also did not like the process to go up and get offensive lineman Giovanni Manu at all, as they traded a future 3rd round pick to draft Giovanni in the 4th round, which I'll be direct, I'm never a fan of trading a future 3 to get a current 4, if that makes sense, especially when the current 4 is later in the 4th round. I was pretty vocal about that at the time. Still do not like that process 2 years later, as Giovanni Manu has played in a grand total of 4 games in 2 years, and the other player that has had significant playing time from the 24 class for the Lions is interior offensive lineman Christian Mahogany, who had a solid rookie season, but unfortunately in 2025 certainly had a lot of ups and downs, more downs than ups, and I know PFF is not the end-all be-all grading system for offensive linemen, but to give you an idea of where he was in 2025, he was one of the worst graded guards in all of football, and I think that kind of shows the type of year that he had, meaning he is not guaranteed to be a starter in 2026. So from going from having Jahmyr Gibbs, Jack Campbell, Sam Laporta, and Brian Branch, the 2024 class has been, well, nowhere close to that, and it was always going to be difficult to have that type of repeated success, but Terrion Arnold is a player that I think can be a starter for the Lions for a couple of years. He probably won't live up to being a high-end corner. That's always going to be a losing battle whenever you draft a corner in the later part of the 1st round, but the 24 class for the Lions was certainly nowhere remotely close in the same ballpark as the previous 3 classes that Brad Holmes had. Now, with the 2025 Lions draft class, there's a lot of context needed because they had 3 selections in the top 170 picks, and anytime you are picking after the 170 mark, those picks are pretty much dart throws, but their 1st round pick was defensive tackle Tyleik Williams, who was clearly more of a run-stuffing defensive tackle than a pass-rushing defensive tackle, and that's not going to show up on the stat sheet. But I don't hate the pick, I do want that to be clear, and anytime that you can have both Tyleik Williams and Aleem McNeil in the middle of your defense, especially with a team that has a philosophy like Dan Campbell does, basically that we are going to be a tough, gritty, and raw team, and if you want to run the football on us with 650 pounds of beef right up the middle, good luck, and good luck trying to muck it up with us in the trenches over the course of a 60-minute game. Tate Ratledge, I thought, had a really good season for a rookie right guard, and the center play for the Lions in 2025 was not great, so for Tate Ratledge to have the year he did in 2025 is very promising. And the big thing that needs to be noted with the 25 Lions class, specifically because Tyleik Williams and Tate Ratledge were their first 2 picks, was naturally those selections are not going to look as fun or as sexy as the 2023 class did. So that definitely needs to be noted with the 25 Lions class, and the one part that I would push back with was the selection to draft Isaac Tesla. Not that I have anything against Tesla the player, It was the process to go up and get him and to trade 3 third-round picks to draft him in the early part of the 3rd round. Now, I will say Isaac Tesla had a couple of really sick touchdown catches in 2025. That part was cool, but whenever there are as many mouths to feed in the Lions offense as there are, I thought that that was a bad process, similar to how I thought the Giovanni Manu selection in 2024 was also a bad process too. Why the Lions are also in a tough situation is because they're in an absolutely loaded division as well as a loaded conference. I personally like Jared Goff as a player, quite a bit in fact, but I think at times he's undersold nationally, and I think people get on him far more than they should. But it certainly doesn't help Goff's case that in a game against the Eagles this year on Sunday night, he was 1 of 13 under pressure for 19 yards, especially against a premier defense. Now, we do acknowledge the weather was not great in that game, but the point is Jared Goff has thrown for 4,500 yards and 30 touchdowns in each of the last 3 years, something a lot of NFL franchises would kill to have, but there are always going to be Jared Goff doubters. And it doesn't help Jared Goff's case that when the Lions' playoff chances were on the line against Minnesota in Week 17 on Christmas Day, they lost by double digits in a game where Jared Goff had 2 interceptions, and the Lions' offense as a whole had 6 turnovers. And this was also in a game where the Vikings started Max Brosmer at quarterback and had 3 net passing yards, and again, beat the Lions by double digits. Now, you can make every joke you want about the Vikings and 9 and everything else, but the fact of the matter is, the Vikings swept the Lions in 2025 while being quarterbacked by JJ McCarthy and Max Brosmer against Detroit. We recently did a video on the Vikings, which I recommend watching after this, but the point is, they're not a joke pushover team. And this is something a lot of people don't know, or maybe just don't realize, but they still finished above the Lions in the NFC North standings in 2025. The Packers also swept the Lions this year, and whenever they have a healthy Micah Parsons on that defense, they can go toe-to-toe with anybody, and given that Jordan Love and Micah Parsons aren't going anywhere for the foreseeable future, they're going to be a problem for Detroit for the next few years. The Lions did sweep the Bears in 2025, and good for them, credit where it's due, but they won 11 games this year. They have a great head coach in Ben Johnson, and we've said this before, but you would like to think this is probably going to be the worst team the Bears have over the next few years talent-wise, and that's just within the NFC North. The Seahawks' future looks incredibly bright, and they look like a team that could be a problem for the rest of the conference for the next few years too. The biggest question for the Rams at this point is whether or not Matthew Stafford will come back in 2026, especially coming off of a year in which he threw 46 passing touchdowns, but the Rams coaching staff is great, and the process they've had building through the draft over the past few years has kind of spoken for itself. They would almost be guaranteed to take a step back without Matthew Stafford, but they have a really good foundation of a roster, and, well, Sean McVay is Sean McVay. The biggest reason why the Lions are in a tough situation moving forward is how difficult it is to have repeated success within the NFL draft. We can be realistic and say Brad Holmes and Dan Campbell will not have a 3-year run like they did from 2021 through 2023, or at least statistically they're almost not going to have that. It's almost impossible to have that type of run again, but the past 2 drafts have been concerning, and the biggest reason that is concerning isn't just because you need good football players to win championships, it's because I really worry about the Lions' depth ultimately when it matters most, especially when you have to pay all of the big players they drafted in that 3-year span. Obviously, having this problem is miles better than having a problem where you whiff on every draft pick and have to completely start over, but this is a problem that I worry about with the Lions as we enter the 2026 offseason. So what should the Lions actually do this offseason to get better so that they have an opportunity to play for a Super Bowl next year? Because even despite the Lions missing the playoffs this year, I don't think they're far off, and I think that they can have a really good offseason this year so that they are playing for an NFC Championship game title next year. They are, to me, still a really good team, and obviously we know the strengths of this roster, but to me, where they need help this offseason is one of the tackle positions, which we'll dive into more in a minute. Center is certainly a position of need, and you could honestly say left guard as well, depending on what they want to do there this offseason. A second edge rusher, as I know Al-Qadin Muhammad had a good year, but I think that they could use an upgrade there as well behind Aiden Hutchinson, and this next position applies to pretty much every NFL team, and it's cornerback, because no NFL head coach or defensive coordinator is going to say, hey, you know what? we're good with the corners we have on our roster. So that applies to really every NFL team. But anyways, right now the Lions have negative $8 million in cap space, but the biggest thing that we have hammered home over the offseason so far is NFL teams are a lot smarter than they were 15 to 20 years ago, and whenever you see a player sign a big contract, that contract is almost guaranteed to get restructured at some point. And with Over the Cap's cap calculator, we restructured 4 contracts to have the Lions go from negative $8 million in cap space to $74 million in cap space by restructuring Jared Goff, Amon-Ra St. Brown, Penei Sewell, and Derek Barnes' contract for 2026. There's other players that you can cut or restructure to free up even more cap space, but the bottom line is the Lions are going to be fine, and they're going to be able to bring in free agents and big name free agents because they can restructure contracts, and that is, again, where NFL front offices are. They are a lot smarter than they used to be, and again, the Lions are not in cap hell. I don't know if anybody thinks that, but trust me, they are not in cap hell. For reference, Jared Goff has a cap hit of $69 million next year, and that is almost certainly going to be restructured. It would be very counterproductive for the Lions to have a player with that big of a cap hit on their books next year, and for transparency, we discussed this in the Vikings video as well. Whenever a player restructures their contract, say Jared Goff restructures the cap hit from $69 million all the way down to $30 million, he is not saying that, hey, I love the city of Detroit. I love when the fans chant Jared Goff, and I'm going to give $39 million back to the team because that's the type of guy I am. It's just an accounting principle. That's just the way that it works. Anyway, the Lions can free up a lot of money, and pertaining to the money freed up, the one player that I think the Lions absolutely have to go after this offseason, under really no other circumstance, they have to get him in, is Trey Hendrickson. Trey Hendrickson is a free agent, and I think it makes a lot of sense for both sides. The Lions desperately need a second pass rusher opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, and whether it's a 1-year $30 million deal or a 2 for $50 million with the contract being extremely front-loaded, whatever the case may be, the Lions will have the cap space to be able to bring in Trey Hendrickson, and that has to be the biggest priority for the Lions this offseason. Now, this is a bit deeper of a guard free agency class, so there is a possibility they kick Tate Ratledge into center and bring in somebody like Elijah Vera-Tucker, Tevin Jenkins, or Ed Ingram to play right guard next year. That's always a possibility, but to me, the biggest thing the Lions have to do in free agency this year at all costs, and I very rarely say at all costs, but guys, they have to bring in Trey Hendrickson. They have to bring in another legit pass rusher opposite of Aiden Hutchinson, and within the NFL draft, the first 2 rounds, I really like Spencer Fano, an offensive tackle from Utah. He played right tackle in 2025, and Penei played left tackle at Oregon, so I think that moving Penei over to the left side is very reasonable, at least in this situation, because he'd have an entire offseason to make the transition, given that there is a lot of uncertainty regarding Taylor Decker's future. If you are in the boat of, hey, Penei is already an elite right tackle, why mess up what's working? By all means, you have every right to think that. Then my point is draft a left tackle so that Penei can stay on the right side. I would just personally trust Penei blocking Jared Goff's blind side more than I would any tackle in this class on the left side, and that's even after Penei has played on the right side for the majority of his NFL career. You get the point. They need to address the tackle position in the first round, and then in the second round, I really like a pass rusher from Missouri in Zion Young, who certainly has an NFL-ready body and a player that can certainly get after the quarterback. He is a very heavy-handed pass rusher, and he's also really good against the run, and he's a player that I think Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes would love, especially with the gritty and toughness that he brings and the ruggedness that he brings within his game. So for the 2026 Lions offseason, the priorities are Trey Hendrickson in free agency, take the guard of your choosing, whether it's AVT, Ed Ingram, Tevin Jenkins, somebody else, again, take your choosing. I would personally prefer Spencer Fano in the first round, kick Penei Sewell over to the left side, and then draft Zion Young in the second round, and really have this team ready to play in 2026, and hopefully a healthier team and outlook for the Lions in 2026 as well, because I really do think with all of these acquisitions that they could be playing for a Super Bowl next year. I hope you enjoyed today's video, and if you did, please like and subscribe as we are closing in at 250,000 subscribers, and I cannot thank you enough for the support. Thank you to Turf Sports for sponsoring today's video, and until next time, please be safe and have a great day. Love you guys.